It's time for the JMRA Football Podcast, a podcast for the fans by a fan. Yeah! Here's your host, Derek Jones.
It's time for another edition of the JMRA Football Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Jones, with you as we run through the National Football League. Week 4 in the books as we turn our eyes towards week number 5. Let's give you the social media rundown. You can check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok by simply searching Joe Montana's Right Arm. Also available on the blog at joemontanasrightarm.com. We do the Sunday Nickel every Monday, a recap of the Sunday action as we give you a little bit of a different view as things broke out each and every Sunday as the weeks go by very fast. And that's, that's the only bummer about the NFL season. It just goes by so quickly. And that's where we're at as we head towards week 5. But before we get there, some takeaways from week number 4. Number 1, the Miami Dolphins. Now, I said last week, the Dolphins, pretty evident that they were, at least after that 70-20 beatdown of the Denver Broncos, they were the best team in the NFL. But as we know, things change very quickly. The new, at least in my opinion, heavyweight champion of the AFC, the Buffalo Bills, drubbing the Miami Dolphins by the tune of 48-20 last Sunday in Orchard Park, New York. Josh Allen, I think right now is the MVP favorite, 320 yards and 4 touchdowns while rushing for another. He was just amazing on Sunday. And look, I think you look back at the 21 season, you look back at last year. To me, the Bills, when they are operating at full tilt, I'm not sure there's anybody in either conference that's better. Now, are the Bills great defensively? I think personnel-wise, you can do some stuff against them. The injury to Tre'Davious White, we'll see where that goes for the Buffalo defense. Losing him at corner could very well be an issue for them down the line in terms of depth. He was already, he's been battling injuries the last couple of years with the torn ACL, coming back from that, and now suffering a torn Achilles last Sunday in the win against Miami. But Buffalo's defense, you've got to give them a ton of credit. They were schemed up well. They knew what to do against an offense that was smoking, coming off of that 70-point outburst against the Broncos. But we see that so many times in the NFL. How many times you watch a team score 40, 50 points and then come out the next week and not quite have the same verve? And that's what you kind of have to take a look at sometimes in the NFL. Those teams that play extremely well offensively, that's tough to sustain for consecutive weeks at the pro level. College, different story. Pros, very tough to do. But having said all that, you've got to give the Bills a lot of credit for slowing down the Dolphins. I don't think the Dolphins are going to go away now because they got handled in Buffalo. Buffalo's a tough matchup for just about everybody in the NFL. Interesting matchup this week for the Bills because they've got to go to London and take on the Jaguars, 9:30 in the morning Eastern time on really what will be one of the more interesting Sundays we have in the NFL season. We'll talk a little bit about week 5 as we get towards the end of the podcast, but tip of the cap to the Bills. Look, they're back after really losing a game in week 1 they probably shouldn't have lost. You lose a game where Aaron Rodgers gets knocked out for, well, at least for now, the year. We'll see how that plays out. But, considering where that team was after week 1, hey, you've got to give them a ton of credit as far as what they've been able to do and a way to bounce back big time after really an emotional loss in week 1 to the Jets. Our next point, we're going to stay in the AFC East and talk about the New England Patriots. I think that the big thing with the Patriots here, and a lot of people have been very negative about Bill Belichick and saying, the game's passed him by. I just think his formula, I don't think his formula has really changed per se. I think if you look at what he did when Tom Brady was there, it was pretty similar, right? They weren't going to wildly overspend on certain positions. They were going to do a lot of the ground round, bargain basement type of thing. And the problem is they don't have those pillars on the offense and defensive side that they used to have. Obviously on offense, you had Brady, special teams. Matthew Slater's been such a staple with that franchise. There are so many things you just didn't have to necessarily worry about when the Patriots were at the peak of their powers. Defensively, you look at the early days of that Super Bowl team, the first 3 Super Bowls. You look at a guy like Ty Law being back there. Up until the second Super Bowl, you had Lawyer Malloy back there. Otis Smith, so many names. Teddy Bruschi along the linebacker side. Richard Seymour eventually. They were so loaded in terms of guys who were maybe not necessarily future Hall of Famers per se. Obviously, Richard Seymour proved things a little bit differently. But, when you look at that defense, they had leaders. Even Mike Vrabel. They had guys who could really set the tone. I don't think that's there anymore in New England, and I think that's one of the big problems. You look at the immense talent he had. He had arguably the greatest tight end of all time. He had the greatest quarterback of all time by many people's estimation, at least on that back half of that Patriot run. Julian Edelman, fantastic wide receiver as well. So those pieces now in New England are all gone. A lot of people like to look at, they lost Brady. Yes, but look at the totality of the talent that they've lost. They lost a guy who was, at the time of his retirement, the second leading receiver in the history of postseason football in Julian Edelman. They lose Gronkowski. They lose Brady. You take those 3 guys out, those are 2 Hall of Famers, and then a third guy who is, not a Hall of Famer in my opinion, but somebody who is a very, very big-time talent in Edelman. And then on the defensive side, they don't have those dogs either. Now, they're certainly far more equipped on the defensive side to take care of business than they are offensively. But all of that leads me to this. The Mac Jones era, it's time. It's a wrap. I mean, Mac Jones is his play has been uninspired, it's been unimpressive, and it's been reckless. And I think that's the biggest problem. You hear so many coaches say, you've got to take care of the football. We can't have guys throwing the football all over the place. That's exactly what Mac Jones is doing, and the Cowboys absolutely embarrassed the Patriots on Sunday, 38-3 in Arlington. Mac Jones, 12 of 21, 150 yards, along with 2 interceptions, and just one of the more dreadful pick sixes you'll see. Deron Bland got him and enticed him to throw across his body, and it was an easy pick six for Bland on the way to the Cowboys winning by 35, and a big bounce-back win, by the way, for the Cowboys after really, I think, people are going to kill him for that Arizona game, and I get it, but I think they were kind of flat because of how they started the year, and then that injury to Trayvon Diggs, I just think they were out of it, and they've had a week to kind of get their frame of mind back up and running again, and they took it to the Patriots. But I think, look, the big thing to me here is the Patriots need a new quarterback. There's no doubt about that. And, if you needed any further affirmation that the run's over, I mean, I don't know what more evidence you need. I mean, a lot of times teams that have these legendary quarterbacks, they're not very good for a minute after those guys leave. The Packers were very lucky to have Brett Favre from 92 to 2007, and then Aaron Rodgers from 2007 to literally this past offseason. Think about that. 92 to 2007 for Favre. And then Rodgers carries the torch. You're looking at basically 30 years of continuous solid quarterback play? That's unconscionable. How crazy that is. That's, Montana and Young. Montana was 79 to 93. He leaves in 93. He really doesn't become a full-time starter until 80. And then in 81, that's his first end-to-end year as a starter, and he wins a Super Bowl. So you really look at Montana's years, 81 to 90 before the injury set in, and then Young steps in after that and is there until 99. So that's almost 20 years. That's 18 years of successful high-level quarterback play. The Patriots, you can kind of make a similar argument for the Patriots that they had, Bledsoe from 93 and then Brady all the way to 2019. That's 26 years of relatively high-level quarterback play on the Bledsoe side, and then the greatest of all time on the back end of it. And if you notice in what I'm saying out of those two examples, there's not a third leg here. One's an accident, two's a trend, three in this case might be a fluke. So the Patriots have got to go back to the drawing board here and find a new quarterback, in my opinion, because Mac Jones ain't it, my friend. Just an absolutely abysmal performance. Credit Mike Lombardi for this stat. Mac Jones is 0-12 now in games where the Patriots are an underdog. He is the king of almost comebacks. They can't play from behind. They don't have the skill guys to play from behind. And this is something that has repeatedly happened now to the Patriots. It was a great run from 2001 to 2019, but the thrill is gone, my friends. Next stop, number 3 on the docket, Cincinnati. We've got a big-time problem, folks, in Cincinnati. The Bengals get beat up by the Titans, 27-3. And I just think that, so many years you can live dangerously and fall behind and then dig out of it. The Bengals are 1-3. They've got their work cut out for them significantly here now moving forward because, look, you can say what you want about the Joe Burrow injury. The reality is they're 1-3 going into really a part of the schedule here where they might be able to make some hay. They've got, when you take a look at what's going on, Arizona on Sunday, which may not be easy. Seattle, that's basically a coin flip game, bye week, and then at San Francisco and Buffalo. I mean, you got to come away with 2-2, ideally 3-1 in that stretch, and that's going to be hard. Arizona, Seattle, San Francisco, and Buffalo, and then Houston, and then Baltimore. I mean, the way Houston's playing right now, there are no easy games in that stretch. You'd assume they'll beat Arizona on Sunday. But man, everything else, that is very difficult. Very difficult. Tough stretch here coming up for the Bengals. Can they make the playoffs? Sure, they can come back since there's a 7th playoff team in the AFC, for heaven's sake. But man, I don't like what I'm seeing there. Joe Burrow, 165 yards on Sunday. Just a very bland, drab offense. Yeah, they've got their work cut out for them for sure, and I think that's going to be a big problem for them moving forward, trying to dig out of that hole. They were able to do it once last year. They've started slow the last couple of seasons and have managed to get to the AFC Championship game. I just think it's going to be very tough to repeatedly do that. And yes, folks, it's time to make our next stop to Taylor Swift land. Taylor Swift and the Kansas City Chiefs, now as the NFL made note of on social media accounts, they are, the Chiefs that is, 2-0 in the Taylor Swift era of Chiefs football. And look, I think a couple things stand out here. The Chiefs survived 23-20 in the win over the Jets last Sunday night. Give a lot of credit to Zach Wilson. He had to turn over late in the game where he fumbled the snap. He was very upset and very disappointed at that. But he played well. 28 of 39 against one of the better defenses in the NFL in Kansas City. 245 through the air, 2 touchdown passes. He played well, and there is a stat floating around that Zach Wilson is the first person to outduel Patrick Mahomes in terms of attempts, completions, yards, touchdown passes. That's pretty notable. But it was in a losing effort, in part thanks to the officiating, a bad call, in my opinion, against Sauce Gardner late in that game to help set up shop for the Chiefs to kind of close out the game. And I think if you're a Chiefs fan, a couple of things here. Number one, I would be very worried about the receiving core. Nobody's stepping up again. And I know it's early and I know there's time, but somebody needs to do something fast because I just don't think playing in these close games, we've seen it from Minnesota. And I know, you're saying, oh, how can you compare Kirk Cousins and the Vikings to the Chiefs, the world champions? We've seen it time and time and again. Playing close games repeatedly, that's not sustainable. It just is not. Playing close games and winning close games all the time, that's not going to be an easy thing to do. And the Chiefs have found their way in that zone a great deal over the last year. Plus, they're going to have to find a way to turn things around offensively because their receivers are not getting open. Now, on to the last bit here. And I don't want to dive too hard into somebody's personal life because that, at the end of the day, that sucks. Who wants to listen to a podcast where you're talking about who's dating who? But it's going to be very interesting to see how this Taylor Swift thing develops. And I think that the question, now she goes on her international tour, I read somewhere, November 9th. So I'm, at that point, then she's going to fade into the background, I would surmise, and we'll take it from there and kind of see where things go. But it is very tricky having arguably the most famous woman in the world following your team around and showing up to games. That's a very, very tricky thing. Is it a distraction? No, I think it does give the opponent ammunition that you really don't need to give them. I would say that. I think that the trick that you have to kind of think about here is the Chiefs, luckily for them, they're a team that is a playoff team. They are a very well-tested team. They've been in high-profile spots since 2018. So they know how to deal with distractions. And look, that ultimately is what this is. No matter how you slice it, this is a distraction. She's not doing anything. She's not in the public discourse. The problem is that the NFL is making this a distraction. And, somebody brought up, I shouldn't say somebody, it was Jason Kelsey actually who brought up this during the New Heights podcast when he and Travis were talking about this. He said that the NFL is not used to having celebrities at games and they're not used to shooting that, whereas the NBA kind of just, the NBA shows people sitting courtside and that's kind of it. And they've had big stars there before, but it's not something they constantly go to. And in this case here, it's references nonstop. It's the cut-ins nonstop. All of that is really playing a factor into what I think is, if you're the Chiefs, this is not a distraction necessarily yet. But you can see the snowball rolling down the hill. Now, I don't know how long that international tour is, but it's going to be very interesting to see if this becomes a thing. I mean, because now it's a little bit of a traveling circus. You've got Blake Lively, you've got Ryan Reynolds, you've got Hugh Jackman. I mean, all of these people, everybody wants to be around Taylor Swift, and I get it. But when it starts affecting the product on the field, and we don't know that it looks like it's not, but you don't want to make it a thing. So it's going to be interesting to see how they play out with this. The word on the street, at least I saw on Twitter today, was that there was no word on whether she was going to be at the game yet on Sunday at Minnesota. We'll see. I think that her being there is, I don't think it's distracting Travis Kelce, but it's a lot of attention that, quite honestly, wouldn't be there. Like, Patrick Mahomes, everyone pays attention to him when he's out there, but this is just another added thing. So this is going to be interesting to see kind of how things play out with the Chiefs. And it's, hey, at least until November 9th, this is a thing that they're going to have to probably deal with on a weekly basis. We'll see where it goes from here, because this is a very interesting dynamic. The NFL keeps promoting it. They keep pumping it up. And until she fades into the background, I think that's going to continue. But we'll see as the Chiefs try to make their way back to the Super Bowl and eventually repeat. But, man, they need some help at wide receiver. I took a long way to say that. I took a long way to say their wide receivers need to get open. The next stop, the Philadelphia Eagles. We've talked about the Eagles a little bit so far, and the idea that the Eagles continue to live dangerously. I think there's an important thing to note here. Typically, the win's a win crowd, that doesn't last. If you look at the Super Bowl winners as of late, most of them, and this is bared out throughout history, most Super Bowl winners, and you can Google it, go on Pro Football Reference, look it up, most Super Bowl winners have a certain look to them during the regular season. It is not a team that is consistently struggling. And yes, the Eagles won against Washington 34-31, but for instance, and I don't want to make the transitive theory thing, because you hear that sometimes in sports. If Team A does this against Team B, and Team B does this against Team C, that must mean something about Team A. I don't feel that vibe yet. As we're recording this, Washington got beat up by Chicago on Thursday night, and they look pretty bad in doing so. And now people are saying, like, Eagles fans are like, wait a minute, how did we go toe-to-toe with this team? I just think a part of it's the Eagles' product right now. The Eagles' defense, at least the front four, the lines are very good for the Eagles. The offensive line has played relatively well. They've kind of held up the normal standard. The defensive line has been very good. The back seven, I think, for the Eagles defensively has been very questionable. They've been able to, that is, the opponent move the football on them through the air. I think that's a major question mark. And Jalen Hurts still doesn't look all the way right to me. I don't know what it is, man. I mean, if he's not throwing to A.J. Brown, everything else kind of looks weird. And that's kind of a problem right now if you're an Eagles fan. They're 4-0, yes. A win's a win, yes. But look at the recent Super Bowl champions. When they win in style. And that's, you look at what the Eagles did last year. They won games rather easily. They are not doing that this year. And I think also, too, it's a byproduct of the schedule. They're playing teams this year that kind of hit you back. So that's where I think things are going to be very tricky for the Eagles coming up here as we move forward in the 2023 NFL season. Taking a look at some of the scores from around the NFL in Week 4. How about Detroit? 34-20, a dominating win over the Packers last Thursday night. They were up 194-1, I believe, in total yardage over the Packers after the first quarter. Woof. A dynamic performance by the Lions to win on the road. Atlanta losing to Jacksonville in London 23-7. This is like a residency, right, for Jacksonville? 2 straight weeks in London. They'll be hosting the Bills again on Sunday. We talked about the Bills topping Miami 48-20. Minnesota getting the win 21-13 over Carolina. Carolina in the market now apparently for number 1 wide receiver, despite the fact that they freaking had one on the roster in DJ Moore, and they let him go. They traded him to Chicago. Terrible. Bryce Young, 204 yards through the air passing. Not great. Then, of course, Super Bowl III between the Broncos and Bears. Justin Fields, 335 yards passing. Khalil Herbert with 103 on the ground. DJ Moore, 131 yards receiving on the day. Oof, folks, not great. 0-4 are the Bears. Well, by the time you're done listening to this, they're no longer 0-4. Spoiler alert. Ravens 28, Browns 3. Pretty simple, straightforward game. Lamar Jackson was great, 186 yards. Some rushing touchdowns in the mix as well. The Browns didn't have Deshaun Watson. He was cleared reportedly to play, but he had a shoulder injury. He opted not to play. And as a result, the Ravens all over the Browns, handling Dorian Thompson-Robinson, one of my favorite rookies in the NFL during the preseason, but he could not get anything going. 25-point loss for the Browns. Rams 29-23 over the Colts in OT. Great comeback by Anthony Richardson was not enough. Matt Stafford, 319 yards through the air. Puka Nacua, 163 and a game-winning touchdown catch in OT to seal it for the Rams. And I got to tell you, the Rams got a chance to make the playoffs, folks. I don't know that they will, because they still got to fight through a tricky division and kind of sift through the rest of that schedule, but they look kind of good right now. I don't think they have the talent to wad their way through the NFC, but is it a big ask for them to be the 6 or the 7 seed? I don't think so. Houston 30, Pittsburgh 6. This may have been the most surprising result of the week. The Steelers get absolutely handled by Houston. Houston led by C.J. Stroud, who is really on his way to potentially rewriting the record book for QBs that are rookies. 306 yards through the air. Nico Collins, 168 in receiving. A mess for the Steelers. Kenny Pickett injures his knee, a bone bruise, just a mess of a performance by Pittsburgh. They get dominated by Houston. When was the last time Houston dominated somebody, especially not in their division? It's been a minute. Tampa Bay with a 26-9 win over New Orleans. Baker Mayfield gets the W on the road. Strong performance by the Tampa defense to really hold a very underwhelming Saints offense in check. We talked about Bengals and Titans, 27-3 win for the Titans. The Eagles, 34-31 win in OT over the Commanders. The only other thing I have to add about this game, from what I was saying earlier, how about the Eagles with under 2 minutes left throwing for the end zone to A.J. Brown and not just killing the clock, kicking the field goal, and getting out of there? That was borderline foolish. Just an absolutely crazy, crazy act by the Eagles offense, but they lived to tell about it, despite the fact that the Commanders went right back down the field and scored with no time left to tie the game up and send it to OT. Oof. The Eagles, again, the year of living dangerously. That's what they're all about this year. Jalen Hurts, 319 yards through the air. A.J. Brown, 175 yards receiving, absolutely roughing up the Washington Commanders. He gets a personal foul call, which eventually helped the Commanders tie the game up at 31. The Chargers, 24-17 winners over the Raiders. It sounds like Justin Herbert's hand injury dislocated his finger. He should be okay. Aiden O'Connell got the start for the Raiders. Made a mistake late, picked off by Asante Samuel Jr., and the Chargers seal it up 24-17. The Chargers still winning in spite of themselves, if you know what I mean. Cowboys 38, Patriots 3. Big win for the Cowboys. The 49ers shed the Cardinals eventually 35-16. Brock Purdy still rolling. 283 yards passing. Brandon Ayuk, 148 through the air, receiving, and then Christian McCaffrey, 106 on the ground. Chiefs surviving 23-20 over the Jets. We'll see if the Jets can keep their season going. And then the Monday night capper. Oh, my goodness. Folks, the Seahawks 24-3 winners over the Giants. Daniel Jones got sacked 11 times. He got pick-sixed as well. And then Brian Daboll's throwing tablets. Just a disgraceful performance by the Giants on national television. I mean, they're a playoff team, but in technicality only from last season. I mean, they don't have playoff talent, folks. Sorry to say it. They don't have the playoff talent. They need an offensive line. They need a defensive line. They need better skill players. They need everything. There's nothing the Giants do right now that scares you on a week-in, week-out basis. Don't give me Saquon, because Saquon, he helps, but he's not helping that much. So I just find the Giants to be in deep, deep trouble. We'll see how things go for them moving forward. And now, speaking of moving forward, week 5. in the NFL. How about week 5? And you talk about big games. We talked a little bit about Buffalo-Jacksonville. That could be an important game in terms of the AFC landscape. But the main event on Sunday will be Sunday Night Football, Cowboys and 49ers. Biggest game of the week, and I think it's a huge game for the Cowboys because the Cowboys can accomplish a couple things with a win. Number one, if they win, if there is a tiebreaker situation potentially for home field advantage, they would have the leg up if they're able to beat the 49ers. The other side to this is if the Cowboys lose, they drop to 3-2. They'll likely be 2 games behind the Eagles in the race for the NFC East. And then, kind of depending on, and I thought I'll credit Chris Russo for this on First Take. I thought he made a fantastic point. If you're the Cowboys, the one thing you don't want to have to do in the playoffs is try to play the 49ers and Eagles in back-to-back weeks. That would be awful. You don't want to have to do that. And that's what the Cowboys could be staring at if they don't win Sunday night. It's real early to say this game has massive, massive implications, but it could. We're hitting towards the part of the year where the Eagles' schedule is going to start to get a little bit more difficult. The Cowboys have a difficult schedule coming up. Things are going to get very tricky for the NFC contenders potentially, and this is just a huge opportunity for the Cowboys with that defense to potentially grab a win. I think it's going to be tough. I like the 49ers to win the game, and it should be the top game of week number 5. And with that, we've reached the end of the rainbow on the JMRA Football Podcast this week. Again, follow us along the social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Joe Montana's Right Arm, also on the blog at joemontanasrightarm.com. Until next time, happy football, everybody, and enjoy week 5. See ya.